Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
You guys, happy Tuesday.
Yay.
Happy American Thanksgiving week Tuesday.
That's
Yay.
right.
That guy is Dan Kent. Hi, Dan. I'm Shawna Boren. You guys are the MuseCast audience. Thank you for tuning in. Dan, you've got some plans for this week, don't you, bud?
Oh yeah, we're driving down to Milwaukee for Thanksgiving, and we're gonna have our meal there with Barbara's family. Barbara is my wife, and her family is outside of Milwaukee in the Waukesha, Muskego, Mukwonago area. So,
love it. I like that you clarify Barbara is my wife, as if you're just, going to Milwaukee with some rando.
Well, you know what though? Like before I was married, there were a couple times when just my family was scattered, and so I ended up just finding people at church who were having Thanksgiving, and I would just kind of, knock on their door and say, "Hey!" And so no, I had a couple people at church who invited me over for Thanksgiving, and so I would go to Thanksgiving at their place. Like my youth pastor had Thanksgiving at his place, and he was great. And I've always wanted to do this, but he would do these Thanksgivings where, working at the church, you get to know people whose families are either scattered or they have broken families or something like that. And so he always had 12, 14 people that weren't part of his family, but they just needed a place for Thanksgiving. And I always thought that was just the coolest thing. Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to do that. Unfortunately, our house is like the size of most people's sheds. And so we literally have a cocktail table in our dining area, and we still don't have enough room. Those cocktail tables are just like,
tiny,
the size of an end table, and we still don't really have room to eat in there. That's how small our house is. And so someday,
maybe on your yacht, you can invite all
yeah, that's right. We're gonna go from a shed to a yacht.
Yes, for sure.
I know.
Or catamaran. How about, that's what you want, catamaran.
That's right. Well, it's a catamaran yacht is what it is, and it's yeah. So how about you? Are you hosting Thanksgiving, or are you going someplace?
Yeah, no, we are staying homebound. My oldest son is coming home. In fact, we go pick him up tomorrow, so he'll be home from college, and then other college people are going to be back in town, and so we'll do our family on Thursday, maybe have friends over later in the evening for, if they want to pop over for dessert. It's kind of an open door policy around here. Yeah. And then on Saturday, we'll do a Friendsgiving with all the college folks that are home and the high school students that are here, and just kind of do that. Come and hang and eat and play games, and I love it. I love it. People and laughter and good stuff. Listen, our family, okay, I'm a vegetarian, right? So I don't eat turkey, I don't eat ham. And really the meat eaters in my family, they don't particularly like turkey or ham. So it's always an interesting, so there's not a traditional main portion. There are traditional sides that we have to have. So it's an interesting thing over at the Boren household.
Well, there you have it.
All right. So we do have a sermon to talk about, Dan, because Greg did share with us. I was going to say ever so eloquently. I don't know. Yes, it was good, of course. But he talked to us about keeping our eyes on the fruit.
Yes.
And you have to say it that way, Dan, fruit. What do you have for us by way of the world-renowned, world-famous summary?
Well, yeah, it's world famous in the sense that, a couple hundred people will see it. So that's good. Which I appreciate, by the way. I'm starved for attention, so I'll take anybody that I can get. So I appreciate everybody who watches. No, we've been doing the tail end of the Sermon on the Mount series, and at this tail end, Jesus really kind of focuses in on this two ways tradition, and he really uses this two ways tradition, which is this kind of method of teaching by contrasting right and wrong in these clear ways. And he uses this to just bring home the entire Sermon on the Mount into just this vivid clarity. and we have 1 week left after this week, and so somehow Greg has to wrap this all up next week. But last week he talked about kind of the narrow gate and the wide way, and how Jesus is this narrow gate or this narrow way. This week he talks about true and false prophets, and he talks about there are going to be people who teach or encourage or help people or move people in one of these two directions, and so there's going to be people who have an incentive to draw others into this wide path that leads to destruction. And so what you have to do is Jesus says, be aware or be on guard, or my translation says, watch out for false prophets. They will lead you down this wide path that leads to destruction. And so how do you really know if what they're teaching is toward the narrow way or the wide path? Well, Jesus says, look at their fruit. Mm-hmm. That is, look at the result of their life in their own lives. And, the first thing I always think of is, like if somebody is a life coach or has written a self-help book and their own relationships are a mess, in my mind, that's a red flag. Like, what's wrong with this teaching that this person has? Now, sometimes things are outside of people's controls. I mean, we all have, it's relationships. And so, but on the other hand, if there's just a lot of that and there's a lot of repeating patterns, that would be an example of looking at a person's fruit before just accepting their teaching, because clearly it's not leading to life and joy and togetherness. It's leading to fracturing and isolation and destruction. And so that's what Greg sort of really kind of drills home in the first part of his sermon is people are going to, and a lot of people have incentive, because if you go down the wide path, there's a lot of influence, and there's a lot of kind of what's that word? There's like a lot of drift or a lot of liftoff that you can get from others for your own self if you can convert, or if you can persuade a lot of people over under you. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme, really. It's like, the more people I can get under my influence down this path, the easier my life will be, and the more I can profit off of them. But of course, the profiting comes at the expense of their life and their joy and their godliness. And so that's sort of kind of what Greg kind of lays as a foundation. But then he gives a couple examples. And the examples that he gives, but he gives examples of how we have all been kind of duped in the past. So he talks about how, good people like us, they used to sacrifice their firstborn child because they thought that's what you're supposed to do. And there were false prophets who convinced a lot of people that you have to sacrifice your first child in order to please the gods. Otherwise your lives will be terrible. And people actually did that. And that's an example of, boy, you've been duped. And then you have, slavery in the United States, which is just, it's shocking that so much of the slavery culture, especially in the South, was facilitated and served and protected by the religious leaders of the time. They were false prophets. Nobody thought that they were false prophets. Everybody thought, well, this is just totally normal. But we get conditioned. Hitler and the final solution in World War II is another example. But I would even argue like a lot of Jim Crow and white supremacy type stuff that is still going on today, which are echoes of that slavery. I think we continue to have false prophets who kind of hide the evils that are still in our systems racially. The fact that, even as late as the 1950s, you had Christians having lynchings on Saturday and then going to church on Sunday morning. It's just like, talk about false prophets. You've been duped. That's clearly not Christian. And so those are examples of how, look, we're all vulnerable to this. We have to be, as Jesus said, on our guard. We have to watch out. And so then Greg gives a couple examples of, potential areas now where we might be experiencing false prophets and false teachings and being pulled down wide paths of destruction. And the two examples he gives, and there are many potential examples, but the two he gives is, the first one is regarding our sexuality, and just looking at how sexuality has become way more important than it has ever been in human history, and just how it's taken on this kind of idolized life of its own, and through things like pornography and sexual services and stuff like that. And so you can look at the fruit. Where does that lead to? Well, it's led to actually young people having less sex, which is kind of strange. Even though it's exalted more and thought about more, it actually happens less, which is curious. It sounds very demonic to me. And there's been more violence, and there's been a lot of abductions and just stuff like that. That's what's happening when we exalt sex like this. And so that's an area where we have to really question, okay, what is the narrow path and what is the wide path of destruction here? And in my own life, where am I at on this with regards to sexuality? And there's no shame, if you're participating in stuff that maybe you don't think might not be good. I mean, we're all susceptible to this. We're all swimming in this water that is just perpetually being lobbied toward this wide path, and so we're probably all experiencing different kind of lies in this category. Another category that he talked about is our consumerism and how we are using our resources, and we've talked about that a lot this summer. But he just makes this point that I think he summarized it really well. It's like we have an economy that requires perpetual growth, and there are a lot of economic reasons why this is the case. But in order for the economy to survive, you have to have the worst thing that could happen in our economy is deflation, where things, we don't have any growth this year. We actually contract. What our economy contracts. That's really risky with the type of economy that we have, and yet so we need this perpetual growth. But it's largely built on fossil fuels, which is a limited resource. And so we need perpetual growth on something that is impossible to be perpetual. And so we really have to question the things that we consume and how much are we using and things like that. Our culture would like to tell us that you don't have to worry about that stuff. You can just keep on using whatever you want to use. And as long as it's convenient for you and as long as you pay for it, then you're fine. And Greg invites us to question that. And there are a lot of other examples, but that's sort of what he talks about. And so that ended up being a long summary. I thought when I was looking at this, I'm like, oh, this will just take like a minute, but I ended up gabbing for like 4 or 5 minutes there. So what did you think of the sermon?
A complete and thorough summary, Dan. What I appreciated about the approach that Greg took and what we heard was it really causes you to open your eyes to see, like, how might we all be the proverbial frogs chilling in the boiling water and not realizing it. Because I think I was trying to think through like previous teachings I have heard or warnings I have heard about false prophets, and it seemed very individualized. Mm-hmm. But this was very like, hey, as a people, as a society, as a culture, we have to be careful, and we have to, like you said, watch out, be aware, not necessarily of a particular person. Sometimes, yes, that's teaching things that are contrary to the kingdom, but sometimes maybe a way of life or just a stream that we're swimming in, or like I said, the frog that chills in the boiling water and doesn't realize it until, so I appreciated just that zoom out perspective of it. It did make me want to ask you, Dan, about this, true prophet versus false prophet. And again, it could sound like we're judging people. Oh, he's a false prophet. Oh, she's and that's not at all what we're doing here. And so I always like to kind of nip those kind of annoying little natty questions in the bud, like from the get-go. So what are we saying in regards to true prophets, false prophets? It's more about discernment, I'm thinking, instead of judgment. And are we talking about actual people? Are we talking like, just kind of break that down for us for a sec?
Well, I think that's a really important thing to bring up. And no, I don't think we're necessarily talking about people, although sometimes we might. I mean, sometimes people, they have ill motives. I mean, their motives are just blatantly self-centered, and those people need to be called out. And I think personally, like what's going on with this SBX, FTX fiasco with this Bitcoin exchange. I think that was intentionally fraudulent, and it's going to cost a lot of people their life savings. And that's, and you have the, Bernie Madoffs and stuff like that, where you do have to, say, okay, that person is being intentionally fraudulent. But most false prophets, I don't think are. I think most false prophets, the American dream, the American system, the type of economy that we have, is fantastic in so many different ways. And as long as you can turn a blind eye to the fact that it's impossible to sustain, there's a lot of things that are really great about it. And so you can like be wrapped up in this system, not really aware of some of those bigger issues, and just see all the good that it's doing, and to see people who are struggling and to help them be more successful in this system. And I think that there's even something very virtuous about that. It's just that when you realize that we're simultaneously feeding something that might end up, causing more damage in the long run, you end up kind of being unintentionally a false prophet, because you've been facilitating and supporting and lobbying for more people to contribute to this. I think the sexuality stuff is another example. I think the sexual revolution, like Greg said, has done a lot of really great things. But I think that it's swung way too far the other way. It's swung from kind of the prudish, conservative, sex is bad, it's only for procreation, to have sex with whoever you want. Sex is actually an expression of self. Sex is how you discover yourself, and all these other just very grandiose things that all somehow emerges from something that's just a stupid little biological activity that happens. It's just been built up into this huge thing. And it's ethically, I mean, the only ethic around there is consent. As long as people are consenting, you can beat each other up, you can pour whatever you want on them. I mean, it's absurd, all of the stuff that happens, as long as people consent. The problem with that, though, is things like consent, and again, this is a systematic thing. Consent is not the get out of ethical jail free card that we think it is, because as we see with pedophiles, a lot of times they get consent from teenagers to do the things that they do. That's what grooming is. Grooming is getting people to consent. And the fact is that through our culture, through our media, through pornography, through all of this stuff, we are all being groomed. We're all being groomed to consent to things that are actually on the wide path of destruction. And like I said, there's no shame in that, because it's part of what we all experience. But it's only shame when you realize that, okay, this system is not sustainable. This pattern of living and treating one another is not sustainable, and it's not godly. That's when you have to examine and say, hey, maybe there's a different way that I should be living and thinking about people that I'm sexually attracted to. Maybe I can't just do whatever I want that pleases me. Maybe, in fact, that sounds very self-oriented, self-centered. Maybe there's a more godly way. But like, you look at like people who are, even people who are in the sexual kind of services industry, I don't think a lot of them are like evil or wicked. They're just wrapped up in this way of thinking about sexuality as this exalted thing that I don't know if it really is. And so when I say that they're a false prophet, I'm not saying that they're somehow Bernie Madoff. I'm just saying that they are fueling this system that might not be good for us. And I think that's kind of what Greg would say also. How does that hit you? Does that sound right to you?
Gosh, I just, yeah. Oh, I think in that particular example that you gave, there are, first of all, I think I do believe consent is important, but I think it's a low bar.
Yes, that's well put. Yes, yeah, it's a low bar.
Low bar. And I know that there are a variety of reasons why people are in situations that they're in that are less than honoring and
Mhm.
less than loving.
Yep.
That's just because of the fallen world that we live in. And there are people who
Well, okay,
experience that.
it's because of the fallen world we live in, but it's also because of individuals who are fueling and feeding off of that fallen world. You know,
Exactly.
you talk about there are people in situations, a lot of those situations that kind of compel women to do these sexual things that they might normally do, but they have to because of the situation they're in. A lot of those situations are facilitated for that very reason, to get them to consent. And
Yeah.
so that's where I'm like, yeah, I think you said it so great. Consent is a low bar, because a lot of times oppressors and perpetrators can create the conditions that
Yeah.
make consent reasonable and maybe even necessary.
The least harming thing is to
Yeah.
consent.
Right.
What I was going to continue to say about the fallen world we live in, but also there are those who exploit and manipulate and abuse and orchestrate. And so, yeah, those apps, I think that's where you kind of get into the false prophet category. I think it's important with that particular example, the consumerism example that Greg gave, and umpteen others. I think it's important for us to, like we said, be aware, watch out, because there are obvious things that we go, oh, no, I would never. However, I think a lot of times we're not cognizant, we're not aware of maybe when we're swimming in shallow waters, just testing things out. And before you know it, you're like fully, submerged in things that aren't good for you, the things that aren't bringing glory to yourself or to God. And I'm talking beyond just the couple of examples that we've talked about. I just think it's really easy for us to say, well, I would never get involved with A, B, or C. But the question is, okay, where in your life are you maybe unaware of buying into the lie, of buying into a way of life or a way of being that isn't what God has for you? Yep. I don't know if I'm saying that clearly enough. So you may have to hash that out a bit more.
I don't know for sure if I can hash it out more, but I definitely agree with what the kind of spirit of what you're saying. I was thinking about like you can, like, I'm on Instagram. I don't really understand Instagram too much. I'll post haikus on there. That's basically all I do. But like I realized, I think I accidentally hit it or something, but there's like this little what is it? A compass icon. And if you click on the compass icon, it shows you pictures of stuff that's going on around you, like things in your geographical area. And I was surprised at how many pictures of young people, particularly females, who were like doing a lot of like seductive kind of poses and expressions. And they're not like supermodels, they're just like someone you would see in the neighborhood. And I look at that, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, like, you can't say that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's like, out of all of the things that you can do in a picture, why is that just like so prominent? And it just raises a question, like, what is our goal with this, and what's our long-term play, and what are we using this technology for, and what are we practicing? Are we practicing seductive poses? I mean, really? I mean, is that we have this $6 trillion technological infrastructure so that we can make these seductive expressions? I mean, there's something kind of absurd about it. But that's like an example of, there's nothing really wrong with it. But it is kind of testing the waters, and it's dipping a toe in a river that could be part of this big zeitgeist, this big context that ends up being part of the wide path. And we all contribute to the wide path. I mean, we all do. The goal is to realize more and more what parts of our lives are wide path and what parts of our lives are narrow gate, and to continue to shift ourselves away from that wide path to that narrow gate. And so yeah, that's sort of the goal. You know, I was thinking about this too. In was it Jeremiah? And Jeremiah talks about the burden of the Lord, and really he's talking about creating good fruit. That's what the burden of the Lord is creating joy, peace, love, building one another up, things that are collectively good, things that are good for your heart in the long run. It takes work. Part of the work is just fighting all of the lobbying and all of the forces that tell us, no, just satisfy yourself and think for yourself and look what you could have. And you have to, that's part of the work, is just fighting all of that temptation. But that's the burden of the Lord, is you have to work at learning how to be more loving and more caring. And as I was thinking about it, you know, as appealing as the wide path is, there's a lot of work and pain and struggle on that path also. And so if you're going to end up working and struggling and toiling anyway, you might as well look at what God is calling us to, and to work toward that. And that was motivational for me as I thought about this week.
That was well said, Dan. I kind of like to land today's plane with maybe just not a nugget yet, but maybe just a practical encouragement, you could put it that way, of like, how can we keep talking about like, beware, watch out, like there's this wide path, and that kind of seems like the way that the traction, you know, that's how the traffic is flowing. And it's just really easy to slip in and just go along. But we need to be mindful of that and like scooch our way out of there and get onto the narrow path. What is something you could say that would encourage folks? Like, how do you know? How do you know you're on the wide path? When you feel like, for instance, I'm going to give a very specific, for instance, we know that as Jesus followers, as kingdom people, like we are supposed to pursue the way of peace, right? We're supposed to love our enemies. And yet that can get really murky when we are fighting for those who are lesser fortunate than us, when we are fighting for those on the margins, when we're trying to bring about social justice. It could feel like we're doing the right thing, but that's where I feel like if we're not careful, we can slip into a wider path, because we are harboring maybe some hatred or resentment or unchecked anger for a just cause, but we're handling it wrongly. Okay, so that's just one example. So how can someone like me know when it feels like I'm doing the right thing, and I know that I love Jesus? How can I be cognizant? How can I like wake up to the fact that I may be heading toward that wide way versus the narrow gate?
Well, I don't know for sure if I can answer it, you know, perfectly, but to me, I keep coming back to the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians 5, and you know, where he talks about like there's the kind of the fruits of destruction, which is sexual immorality, idolatry, hatred. If you feel hatred, that's an indicator that you're not on the narrow path. Drunkenness, fits of rage, and I've experienced this where I'm just like, I just have like this tantrum about something, and it's like, where the heck did that come from? What am I, 5 years old? Why am I, you know, like acting like that? And then that's like, and this isn't, Paul's not writing this to shame us, make us feel bad. He's helping us. He's like, hey, that's great. You just had a fit of rage and you have no idea where it came from. That's an opportunity. That's an indicator light that you're on the wrong path. And so when you hear these things, don't think, oh, here comes Paul shaming me again. No. He's here to tell you, hey, look, good news. You had a fit of rage. That means that you're going the wrong way and you need to go the other way. And then likewise, when he talks about the fruits of the Spirit, when you have like this joy and peace and and patience, and you're patient with one another. Boy, how patient are you with others? I mean, that's a tough one in our culture. We're so impatient with one another, especially on social media. But kindness and goodness, and the more of that stuff that you feel and you live out, the more you're probably on the right path. And so I love using the fruits of the Spirit passage in Galatians 5 as sort of kind of like a compass to kind of let me know where I'm at between the two paths. And so that's the best answer that I can give, I think.
No, that was great, Dan, because it was practical. It's utilizing God's word to kind of act as a compass. And I love the indicator light language. It's not saying, oh, you're about to combust right here and now. No, it's like, oh, something's up. You need to deal with this.
You need to look under the hood.
Yeah, look under the hood, do a little inspection. I would just simply add, and I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but community, people, right? Like, we need people, and people help us to see, hey, Shawna, love your heart for this, but are we kind of going about things the wrong way? Or is this really what we mean to be communicating? Is this really what we mean to be presenting? And so I think that's helpful.
Definitely.
The word of God, people, I think it's really helpful.
That's right.
All right, Dan, are you ready? Because I have a little instruction for you.
Oh, okay.
For nugget time. Nugget time today is going to be something that you can encourage our MuseCast community with, that you are thankful for, a reason why you are expressing gratitude, and why they too, with everything going on in the world, why do we have hope, and why are we thankful and grateful?
Yeah, I think I think what I would say is we have this cool kind of system that heals itself, and what that means is that I don't mean just physically. I mean, that's pretty cool too, but I think spiritually and emotionally and psychologically, all of that stuff, we can live on the wrong path. And we can have an epiphany. We can maybe notice in Galatians that we have these indicator lights saying we're going the wrong way. We can have real suffering in our life because of the choices that we're making. And we can change. And all of the damage from those bad choices, a lot of that can heal in our lives. And I just think that that's so cool that a lot of times the consequences of our bad decisions are not permanent. And I'm so grateful for that we can learn and approach the light, and we can heal. Unfortunately, we can't heal 100% in this life, and we all get old and all of that. But for the most part, it's a pretty amazing thing how resilient we are, and how resilient God's Spirit is in us. That's probably what I'm thankful for. But let me just say one other really quick thing, because this is what I had prepared to say. And I promised I was going to say it. So Barbara this morning had this just great insight. So this is Barbara's nugget. But she had this great insight. We had a dog, Ansel, and we loved Ansel very much. And I just remembered thinking, like, it was so fun to give Ansel a bone or a chew toy or something like that he liked. He was just so excited and filled with so much joy and gratitude. And Barbara was just thinking this morning, like, she just loved seeing Ansel's reaction to the chew toy. And it's like, even though she knew that Ansel was happy, there was something about actually seeing it that was just so great for her and for me. And she just noted that I think God is probably that way too. It's like he knows that, what brings us joy and happiness and kindness, but I think he also likes to see it. And Barbara just made the point that she thinks that that's partly what worship is just showing God our gratitude and showing God how happy we are with the blessings that he has given us. And I thought it was a really great nugget for this Thanksgiving week in America.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Barb. My nugget, my thankful nugget is I'm so thankful that we are not on this walk, in this journey alone. I am thankful for the fact that because of technology, the advancement of technology, we are connected to one another in profound ways. And I think about the folks who aren't local to Woodland Hills. but they are deeply connected to Woodland Hills. Many are even becoming covenant partners with Woodland Hills. And they no longer feel isolated theologically. They feel like they have a family and a home and a people because of this. And we join you guys every week because of this. And I'm thankful for the means by which we can do it, but I'm most thankful for what is on the other side of this line, what's on the other side of the camera, and that is you guys. I just think that is really powerful. We're not alone. We're all doing this together. It is a journey, and thank God we have one another to lift one another up. Yes, Dan's wearing the shirt.
Yeah, I've got the shirt. There it is.
Very cool. Yes, we are, and we truly are. And when one of us is struggling, we can lean on the strength of a brother or a sister. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for being a part of this family. This strange family that we have,
Yes,
but it's a blast, and I am profoundly grateful. So thank you. Have a great week, everyone. Dan, any last words?
I'm out of words, Shawna.
Okay.
I've used all of my words, so
He is good to go. He says he thanks you guys, and
thanks everybody.
He's excited.
Well, hey, Shawna, listen.
Yeah.
Shawna, did you see, like, I looked, and some of these MuseCast episodes are getting 800-900 views, 1,000 views. I mean,
I know.
Little old us,
I know. Just goofy little us.
Yeah. We're gonna have to start wearing influencer clothes, with like big pompous sunglasses, maybe, and maybe I'll get a face piercing or something. I don't know.
Ooh, that would be interesting. Well, stay tuned. Who knows what's going to happen? Have a great week, you guys. Hey, there's one more sermon in this series. You don't want to miss it. And then circle back with Dan and I. We'll just continue that conversation like we always do. We are so thankful for you. Have a great week.